I'm almost certain if I was to ask any South Australian, the one thing they remembered from the state government election in 2022, you'd all come up with the same answer: ramping. In particular, the brutally effective campaign from the Australian Labor Party into ambulance ramping in South Australia and their commitment to fixing the ramping crisis in this state. Well, 1 year on from that historic election, 1 year of the state Labor government, it's probably no surprise that we're already seeing some backpedaling on that election commitment, maybe a little bit of musical chairs on their election policies. Well, here's a video earlier this week, recording of Chris Picton on that ramping commitment.
But the Health Minister claims his party's pledge never centred on ramping hours, maintaining it was to return ambulance response times to 2018 levels.
That's exactly what we said before the election. That's exactly what we're saying now.
Well, quite frankly, South Australians are sick of the smoke and mirrors when it comes to ramping.
By how many hours?
By a lot of hours.
Surely you're discussing a target with the Premier.
Yeah, and the target is to get ambulance response times back to where they were.
To achieve that, the union says
ramping hours definitely need to be reduced by thousands of hours.
Maintaining that their commitment before the election was talking about ambulance response time. Nice try, Chris Picton, but clearly from all of your social media before the election, we can all remember every single Stobie poll we drove past had a big Labor sign saying, "We will fix ramping." You could not turn on your TV or your radio station without an advert from either the Australian Labor Party or the Ambulance Association here in South Australia saying that the Labor government will fix ramping. Well, those goalposts have now been well and truly moved, or attempted to anyway, by the Health Minister. It's actually a little bit laughable. Let's have a look at what he said in the lead up. In fact, 2021, before, obviously, when he was the opposition spokesperson for health.
Last month, a woman died after being ramped for more than an hour at Flinders. It took an opposition freedom of information request to unearth the earlier incident.
It clearly says that it was a detriment to the patient and to the organisation. Well, clearly, this is showing the signs that ramping is deadly.
Again, clearly, this is showing the signs that ramping is deadly. Not that our ambulance response times are inefficient, it is ramping itself that was the problem. Now, Chris is now trying to say that, oh no, ramping is the problem that causes ambulance response times to be a problem. Well, let's look a little bit deeper into that. Chris Picton, let's have a look at another video from 2021.
The system is in crisis. What we're seeing is that what happened occasionally in terms of ramping is now happening almost every single day. Here at Flinders Medical Centre yesterday, there was an extreme ramping situation where patients were stuck on the ramp for hours and hours on end. One ambulance was stuck here with a patient for at least 3.5 hours. The average time that ambulances were taking to drop off their patients was well over an hour yesterday afternoon. That means that patients suffer, that means that they don't get the care that they need, and that means that ultimately their deterioration it happens worse. We have today obtained a document internal from the government which reveals the true state of what the government knows about the risks of ramping across our health system. This document is a risk register from SA Ambulance Service, internal to the government, has never been released before. And what it shows is that the government knows how extreme and how awful the ramping risks of our hospitals are. Ramping is listed as the worst risk that the organisation of SA Ambulance faces, and it's extreme and it's getting worse. The document very clearly says that patients' lives are at risk and that patients are suffering worse outcomes because ramping is getting worse. The document also says that there's a high risk of infection control problems because ambulances aren't meant to deal with patients for so many hours on end.
Clearly, they were concerned about people being ramped in front of our hospitals, the health concerns of leaving people, elderly, children, in an ambulance for hours on end in front of our hospitals. Well, you know what? Now ramping is worse than ever, almost 100% worse than it was when the Liberals were in charge. Let's have a look at a few of the social media posts. Here's one from the 17th of November 2021 from Chris Picton on the steps of Parliament. 44,000 signatures delivered to stop ramping. Today, a petition signed by over 44,000 South Australians were delivered to Peter Malinauskas, Susan Close and I. It calls on the government to increase ambulance resources and to end ramping. Sadly, ramping has increased by 576% in the past 4 years. We today heard heartbreaking stories from paramedics and family members about the impact this has had on lives sadly lost. Thank you to the Paramedics, Ambulance Employees Association and community members who have worked so hard to sign this petition. Well, that's 44,000 South Australians that signed your petition to call for ramping to be stopped in our state. Here's another one from the 17th of November 2019. Remember, up until 2018, for the past 20 years, we actually had a Labor government in this state. 17th of November 2019. A third death this year of a patient after being ramped in an ambulance shows that ramping crisis is now deadly. The beds that the government closed last month should be immediately reopened to ease the pressure on our hospitals. So that is a direct quote from Chris Picton that calls the problem for what it is. We need more beds in South Australian hospitals. We need a better healthcare system. We need better treatment for mental health. We need larger emergency departments. We need people to have better in-house care. We need more GPs in the state so people don't go to emergency departments. That is the chronic part that we need to address. It is not sending more paramedics out there to have more ramping, as Chris Picton will now try and make us believe. But at the end of the day, no one in South Australia will be buying these lies, and everyone will judge this government on their ability to fix or not to fix the ramping crisis in South Australia.
Maintaining it was to return ambulance response times to 2018 levels.
That's exactly what we said before the election. That's exactly what we're saying now.